Tikubulise ndikwamkele mbukeli to your #1 youth show, and that is of course Expressions right here on SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Ndimloke uKhalosa Kalubisi, the brightest star in the galaxy, unonkanyezi. Hayi mbukeli, South Africa still has a long way to go in the long fight against school dropouts. The 2024 report mbukeli conducted across the country iyabonisa into bangaba the overall dropout rate of 33% by respondents was not far from the 40% estimated in the basic education system. Those are quite alarming statistics when Azaria.
Very alarming, Kholosa. Hayi ke mbukeli ngikubingelele ngikwamukele kuhlelo lakho iExpressions khona la kunqa phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Mina egama lami ngoAzaria kwaKhoza. Now, the Minister of Basic Education Siviwe Kwahube during her speech at the 2024 matric results announcement ceremony earlier kulonyaka raised this issue mbukeli. Ake sizwe ukuthi ungqongqoshe uthini ngalolu daba.
In 2013, we saw approximately 1.2 million learners start grade 1. Of these learners, approximately 740,000 enrolled as full-time candidates in grade 12 in 2024. Now, as the DM pointed out, I too must give a small lesson here. I must point out that this does not mean that those who did not enroll for grade 12 in 2024 have dropped out of the education system. This has often led to a misconception that these learners are lost to the system, which is often not the case. Firstly, learners have a choice after grade 9 to switch to technical and vocational education training colleges, and indeed a number of them do so. Secondly, learners at different times progress to different grades, with some moving to become part-time candidates and some changing subjects. And furthermore, learners migrate from public schools to private schools and sometimes often write IAB or Sakai exams. So these learners are therefore still part of the system, just not part of our class of 2024 as full-time candidates who wrote the exams through the DBE. We cannot therefore classify all of those learners who entered the schooling system in 2013 but who did not enroll in 2024 as having dropped out. This would be a misrepresentation. However, as a sector, we must develop systems with the necessary sophistication to track each and every learner throughout the entire schooling system and the higher education and training system to ensure that we are better placed to account accurately for each and every one of our learners.
Interesting insight coming from the Minister of Basic Education, highlighting one of the key pressing concerns that we'll be tackling on today's show. Why are scholars dropping out? Be sure to interact with us on our social media platforms. But to help us unpack this topic further, we are joined by Mr. Colin Wardle from the Zero Dropout Campaign. He will be joining us remotely. And in studio, we are joined by Realeboga Mageledise from the Equal Education. This is a democratic movement, Kembugeli, that advocates for quality education. And I do want to highlight that we have extended an invitation to the Department of Education, meaning that they did not acknowledge our invitation. But we continue with the discussion. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, Ria. And Mr. Colin, thank you so much for making time for us. And I think, before we dive deeper into this discussion, it's quite important that we understand the scope of the problem. As the Zero Dropout Campaign, you are on the ground, you're actually conducting research on this matter. What would you say, how bad is the situation?
Well, thank you firstly for having us this evening. It is a pleasure to be able to discuss this crucial issue with yourself as well as your audience. And to answer your question, I think you did a really great job of framing the issue at the beginning of this segment. It is currently estimated still that 4 in 10 learners who begin grade 1 in South Africa will not complete grade 12. And for us as a campaign, as people have come to a consensus or better understanding of that figure, we really wanted to dive deeper into that data and get an understanding of what are the key drivers that are leading learners to become disengaged and ultimately drop out. And obviously doing that in the hopes that by doing so, we'll be able to make policy recommendations as well as interventions that would speak to the needs to address dropout in South Africa. Yeah. So while there has certainly been an improvement in, as you highlighted the amount of learners that matriculate, especially from now, and we compare it to perhaps something like 1994. For us, what remains as a key indicator that still needs to be addressed is about the amount of learners who still make it to grade 12, which unfortunately, when looking at last year's class, had a 1.1 percentage decrease compared to the previous year. And it's been said that that may have been partly a result of the pandemic, as last year's class also would have began high school in 2020. And for a lot of people who believe that, it is safe to assume that the lockdowns and the extended rotational learning had an impact on those learners and their ability to finally make it to matric last year.
Yeah, and I mean, Ria, those are such alarming rates. And I mean, if you're going to look at these learners that are dropping out, they are depriving themselves of, fulfilling their dreams and reaching their full potential. We are looking at future doctors here, future engineers, entrepreneurs. So what are some of the key drivers that would say that, they really contribute to South Africa's, dropping out in school? And I mean, what would you say are the key contributing factors?
Thank you so much for having me. I think one of the key contributors is the overcrowding that we have in schools, because teachers now are expected to teach more than 65 learners within a classroom. And of course, those who have learning disabilities or maybe might need extra attention cannot receive that extra attention that they deserve or rather need. And, the morale to continue in school becomes less. And one of the other things that we also see and we work with in equal education is the scholar transporting that we have. That is a highly seen problem basically in the country, where a lot of kids have to go to school and they have to walk to school, they have to walk far distances, and they end up losing that motivation to go to school because, I mean, having to wake up and walk 3 hours each and every single day at some point is going to demotivate you.
Yeah, and there's also a growing concern that, I mean, looking at the curriculum that is current within the education system, that it's not relevant, it does not meet, I mean, the standards or the jobs of the future. And I mean, there's also experts that believe that introducing vocational or technical training can actually help the students and keep them interested during the school years. Do you agree, and do you see our education system really relevant, especially when we look at your 4IR and AI?
No, definitely. I think that's one of the things that needs to be introduced, because with vocational training, you give them practical skills, especially if not all students have, or learners rather, have that ability to focus on theory subjects or mathematics, but rather they will find their hidden talents within vocational training. And they'll also see that there is no shame in going to a TVET college, for instance, because that can help them with exactly what they are good at. And also, in this economy that we're living in, it's very important to have a skill that you can use your hands with so that you can find employment or create employment for yourself.
Lovely. And I mean, Colin, I mean, looking at how, learners that are living with disabilities or have any form of disabilities, how can they be adapted within this approach? Because you'll find that there are learners with autism or ADD. They are really struggling when it comes, to their academic. I mean, what strategies can be employed to ensure that they also feel that they are included in the education system and they are relevant to provide jobs of the future? What strategies do you think we can employ?
Well, I think when it comes to that issue in particular, there is a lot of work that is still being done and needs to be done to address that. If I remember correctly, last year we formally introduced sign language as a language of instruction within the schooling system, which I think was long overdue, and as an official language of instruction. And I think that was certainly progress. I believe the Department of Basic Education is also currently working on its white paper for learners with disabilities. And I think with that will come a lot of policy work and recommendations and new regulations that will address this issue. But in the interim, I think something that was just raised, which is also important, is the lack of resources and support for these learners. During the course of our survey, 5% of respondents said that they had not received sufficient teacher support, and that was one of the contributors to them dropping out. So with that, we can only imagine how much more difficult it is, particularly in under-resourced and underprivileged schools where there are learners with disabilities who do require additional tutoring or even often, struggle with issues such as access and mobility.
Yeah, and Colin,
so
before we go to the break, because you touched on a very important point earlier, you spoke about policy recommendations, and I'd love to know, what have you put forward? I mean, with the campaigns that you're having, what have you put forward as a recommendation to address this issue?
Well, we've made a number of recommendations, but kind of the three main areas that we believe would lead to drastic improvements in addressing learner dropout would be the tracking of learners. So making sure that that is taking place in real time and it's happening digitally. And with that we are not just tracking the attendance of the learner, but we are also monitoring their performance within class. We are monitoring their behavior and looking at other key indicators to make sure that we can intervene before the learner disengages and leaves the schooling system, because it becomes so much more difficult to get them back once they have. And then following that, we're looking at issues of psychosocial support. Our learners essentially have to overcome a great deal of psychological and socioeconomic challenges. And with that, there is a requirement for, counseling and other mentoring services and interventions that could take place. And lastly, to address the gaps that we have in learning is what are known as accelerated or sometimes catch-up programs. And these are to help learners who have fallen behind a year, 2, 3 years in a rapid amount of time so that they can master the foundational skills that they are lacking and catch up to their peers.
And Mr. Colin, I mean, this surely means that, this needs a holistic approach. And with what you've just mentioned, it means that we need to come together as a society to sort of combat this issue. Mugeli, we continue with the discussion, and it's very important that we engage you as a young person. After the break, regarding this matter. Make sure that you interact with us on our social media platforms. For now, don't move a muscle. You're watching Expressions.
Siphinde sikwamukele mbukeli usabukele Expressions khona la kunqa phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Uma ngabe usanda ungena mbukeli, namuhla sikhuluma ngengqinamba ezahlukahlukene eziphoqa abantu abasha ukuthi beke isikole phakathi. Njengoba ubona ke mbukeli ngilapha enkabeni yedolobha eAlexandra to meet up with a young lady who was also forced to leave school just before she did her matric. Without wasting time ke mbukeli, ake hlangane naye sizwe ukuthi udaba lwakhe luthini. Ngicela mhlambe ungithathe ungibeke esithombeni ukuthi wena yiziphi izizathu ezakufoster noma zikuphoqa ukuthi uyeke isikole.
Okay, and the reasons taka gore ke tlogele sekolo. First thing, I'm a breadwinner and I stay with my 4 siblings and my son, and we stay in the one room. Okay, I dropped out of school in the age of 16. Why? The reason was my mom, she was very sick. So like go kula ga mama ka gong affectile gagolo because of ekia ko sekolong ne ke sa gone concentrate. Like I was thinking gore okay, I left my mom home, is he like komothola a phila or ba wile sepetlele, like I understand. So until neng fa too much like stress ko sekolong ke tsene ke sa gone le go concentrate le ko classing. And like it was a lot for me because of I was still young and I had a child at an early age and my mom is sick. I have to take care of my siblings. Like when I get from school, I have to make sure that I clean the house, I cook, I bath my mom, I give my mom her medicines, like make sure that okay, everything is fine in the house. So yeah, like now for now it was heavy because of last born. Even like my the last born of my mother, he was 1 year.
So since ungakwazanga uqeda isikole, ucabanga ukuthi ulahlekelwe yini? And what do you think, how has that have affected your life? Do you think ukuthi impilo yakho would have been different if uqhubekile nesikole?
Yeah, I think it would be really different because of maybe nekuthola the opportunity ko sekolong because of like ko sekolong khwatla batho like the bursary, like batho ba tlo checkang gore bana ba sekolo ba tsamaya jwang, and then maybe I will be that lucky girl mo eleng gore I'll get something and then itlonkisa somewhere.
Bofuna ukuba yini? Bofuna ukwenzani after isikole?
Mina after isikolo ishiyazine. Not in a bad way. Nekina litsona like ne ke na le tsona like dreams and everything. Mara ish into after then mama ka akula and then like even young, understand, like next like ke na le hope ka anything. Kutlile botlhoko because of like ke bona like batho ba ene gore ke be ke bala le bona ba ya sekolong, like pelo ka ne le botlhoko mara gape ka ipotsa goreng maybe like dilo tse ding di etsagala for a reason.
So mhlambe iziphi inhlelo ocabanga ukuthi izikole can implement to assist young girls like yourself abazithola bakwizimo ezifana nawe, so that we can help to keep girls in schools? What do you think schools should do?
I wish ikolo like singa provide la labantwana like counseling esikolweni, maybe kube na le food parcel ngoba like kubhlungu gore bala usaja utsogo usaja uye esikolong, like agona next kontlung afetsa still ko esikolong there is nothing you can eat, like you wish ankar like ko esikolong like bakatlisa dilo like go tshwana le food parcel, like counseling, like yeah, le di activities tse di tla etsang bana ba ba lebale gore ba go through situation tse jwang.
Ake mbukeli njoba usizwele ziningi ngempela izingqinamba eziphoqa intsha yalapha eningizimu Afrika ukuba iyeke isikole, kodwa ke ukhumbule ukuthi that you can be part of this discussion. Head over to our social media pages sizwe uvo lwakho mbukeli, uyazi ukuthi lo hlelo silenzela wena. Okwamanje ake sithi qhu eyitolo. This is Expressions right here on SABC1.
Welcome back. You're still tuning in to your #1 youth show Expressions right here on SABC1. Saqhubeka nengxoxo mbukeli apho sithetha khona nge-zero drop mbukeli apho sithetha nge-dropouts zabafundi esikolweni. We are still joined by Mr. Colin Wardle from Zero Dropout, and in studio we have Realeboga from Equal Education. Welcome back again, Ria. And just reflecting on the second segment, I mean, that incident was very painful. Umntana uthi uyeke isikolo because mama wakhe ebegula. There's a little sister nayo jonge kuyo. These are the realities of many learners, you know, out there. And I do want to find out from you, because I mean, you are on the ground with young people, you are engaging with policy makers, you are engaging with the government. What sort of solutions is bakhona that are recommended so that we combat this issue?
Okay, as Equal Education, we have a number of solutions to these problems, but of course the Department of Basic Education doesn't necessarily always respond well to them. One of them being, of course, increasing the amount of teachers that are placed within a school, because you know, in the second segment you heard that the learner had a crisis of at home, there were problems that forced her to drop out of school. Had there been enough teachers in the school who could at least see that there is a problem with this specific learner, then they would have been able to assist her coping with academics and coping with her home situation. So these are one of the things that we really advocate for, because you know, when there is a lot of kids in the classroom, then of course some of them are bound to get lost within the class.
Yeah. Mr. Colin, you did mention earlier that we must use technology, and you also, you know, just go digital to ensure that we sort of, you know, track these students, because if a student is sitting at home, who would know? Whose role is it to ensure that they are rolled back in school? And I mean, how can we better track students who leave mainstream schooling to ensure that they continue to be supported?
So I think one of the key things is that there are existing systems within the Department of Basic Education that are utilized for learner tracking. So it would be essentially the expansion of those systems to make sure that people are trained on how to use them, but also that one of the things you find, as Ria had just pointed out, is that our teachers are, you know, are stretched very thin. So sometimes a teacher is too busy to even take roll call. And more so, once they've taken that roll call, there isn't someone who's going to process that data to say, okay, on this day, these learners were missing. And maybe last week, the same ones were missing. So there's a trend here. So it does require for the systems that are in place to actually be supported by personnel, by staff, people who are actually making it a priority to track this, these attendance as well as this data, and then also sharing that information with the relevant stakeholders to ensure that learners are receiving the support that they could. So that is, you know, probably the first step. And then beyond that, then there's looking at how do we make these systems more digitized, how do we make them more robust, and like you said, bring them into the 4IR. But for the time being, I think it's crucial for us to get the fundamentals and the systems that we already have in place working and digitize and modernize.
In just 30 seconds, Ria, I mean, there's a Lena Obukeleyo Otimna, I'm quitting because of all these contributing factors that we've mentioned on the show. Just 30%, 30 seconds, how would you advise them?
I think I would advise them to seek assistance from civil society, because there are organizations such as Equal Education that really works with communities and tries to assist communities in the best way to keep learners in schools, and educators also, supported in the schooling curriculum as well. So I would advise them that they stay in school and seek organizations such as Equal Education.
And that's how we wrap it,
That's
Zaria.
how we wrap it, Mzansi. Sethemba ukuthi sizosebenza ndawonye ukuthi sigqugquzele osisi bethu nobhuti bethu abancane ukuthi bangayeki isikolo. Ake mbukeli asikushiyi wedwa. Frame Music is standing by on the other side. Uthi Jehovah. Bye-bye.